Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 17-ish of my Fire Emblem 6 hard mode chapter guide. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 14, Arcadia, which is the desert chapter for the game. Yay, everybody loves a good desert chapter. So for those of you who don't know, what a desert chapter basically means is that we're going to be doing it all on desert tiles, which do give you 5 avoid, but the more important thing is they restrict movement. So both flyers and infantry magic users like Lou and Saul will not be restricted. And then on the other end of the spectrum, horse units like Alan, Lance, Clarine, even though she's a magic user, will be restricted quite a bit, to the point where Cavaliers actually only get 1 movement, I believe, on these desert tiles. So I would highly recommend not bringing them. Everyone else, I believe, gets restricted half movement, something along those lines. So like 3-ish for promoted infantry, and then I think 2 or 3 for unpromoted infantry. Now, I'd really like to talk about the chapter itself, but obviously we can't see anything because of Fog of War. So I normally don't do this in this series, but we're going to be looking at an actual image of the chapter to kind of go through what the chapter looks like. For those of you who are curious, this is from, I believe it's called Fire Emblem WOD, FireEmblemWOD.com. And just an aside, I'll leave a link to this specific page in the description, but if you are looking for resources that show you like reinforcement data and things like that, highly recommend using this website. It's the one I use basically default when I'm looking for reinforcement data and stuff for chapters. So anyways, let's talk about the chapter itself. So as you can see, there's a few Manikeets here. We did just fight our first Manikeet a few chapters ago. If you remember, they're very tough. Now, these Manikeets get restricted quite a bit by the sand, so I wouldn't worry too much about them, and you don't have to fight any of them. I don't think any of them drop anything. There isn't a ton you have to worry about initially. As you can see, there's a few mages that are going to be coming at you, and then there's these wyverns in the top left. Being aware of these wyverns is really important, because especially that wyvern lord can hit you really hard, especially if you put like sages, for example, who have a lot of movement, too far out ahead of your team. Now, once you get around basically the ridge in the north there's going to be some mercenaries, a hero, and then there's some more mercenaries and a hero. Now, when you get to this point, honestly, there's not a ton to deal with. The biggest thing about this chapter is the biggest thing about most Fog of War chapters, which is bringing thieves, bringing potentially the torch staff, and just making sure you have vision. Now, one of the things that's not shown here, and I wonder if this is because this is the best one that I could find, but I wonder if this is because this isn't technically hard mode. There is a bishop. I'm not really sure. I think this is probably normal mode. There is a bishop around these mercenaries and heroes and stuff who does have sleep. And I believe there's also one with silence. So be aware of this. Bringing a restore and a decent amount of healers can be really nice. Getting your character slept. We talked about this before, that deployment order matters. So potentially putting people who you don't really care about getting slept lower is important. But sleep, especially in this chapter, can be really tedious to deal with because characters are already moving really slowly. So I would highly recommend bringing Restore for this chapter and potentially a few healers that can use it. Now, Cecilia, the character we're going to be getting, can use Restore, so you do sort of have that as an out. But yeah, that can be really tricky. Now, here's one of the other kind of interesting things about this chapter. Normally on desert chapters, there are items hidden in the sands, and this is true for this chapter as well. But there's also a time commitment to this chapter if you want to get the Gaiden chapter. And so you're actually going to have to sort of make decisions on getting items that are in the sand. And I'm also going to be showing a image. These are the items that are that you can get on this chapter. Now, normally, as I said, there's no like time commitment to like Fire Emblem 7 Desert Chapter or Fire Emblem 8, so you can just go around at the end of the chapter and pick up all the items. But you have to complete this chapter in 25 turns. Now, hypothetically, you can get all the items. For those of you who don't know, the way the items work is, I believe you have like a 5%, maybe it's even like a 10%, to pick them up with any character, but it's like a 50-50. I think it varies on game. I think you might have 100% to pick up desert items with thieves. So thieves are already really good on this chapter because of the Fog of War, and they're extremely good because of the ability to pick stuff up. Oh, in this game, okay, it is 100% for thieves to pick up items. Other characters have a 9%. So you can try to get other items with other characters, but thieves are going to be your best bet for this. Now, what items should you be picking up? As I said, you can potentially get all of the items, but it does become a bit tedious. So the items that I think are really important are the boots, of course. Now, the boots, you're going to probably go up this way anyway, so the boots are kind of something you're going to get on most playthroughs anyways, but boots are +2 movement. They're amazing. Highly recommend getting. Also, the Speedwing and the Talisman behind you, where you start, are pretty easy to pick up just right off the bat with a Thief, and they're extremely useful as well. The final item that I get, other than the Guiding Ring, which we'll talk about, is the silver card in the top left. You really want the silver card. Make sure you're getting the silver card here. It's extremely important. There's going to be a chapter in a few chapters down the line where we're going to need to buy or want to buy a bunch of fairly expensive stuff, so the silver card is extremely important for that. Now, the Guiding Ring can only be picked up by Sophia, who's a character that we're going to be getting. You have to keep Sophia alive to get to the Guiding chapter here. We'll talk about Sophia and the problems with Sophia, but she does get you a free Guiding Ring, which is kind of nice, so just make sure that you're getting that before you go. The items that we're not getting are Silent Staff, the Warp Staff, and the Silver Blade. Now, as I said, you can absolutely go out of your way to get these items if you want, but I find these items to be a bit tedious to get and not as necessary. The Silent Staff can be very, very useful, and if you can find a way to get it, I would also recommend that one. It's just I usually don't. One of the best ways to get it is to have a thief be sort of picked up by one of your Pegasus Knights, drop them off, get the Silent Staff, and then move on. There isn't a ton. We can go back to looking at the actual map. There isn't a ton around where the Silent Staff is. It's just that, again, this is a time commitment. You can also see on this map the red on the map. Eventually, I'm not sure exactly what turn it is. There are some brigands that are going to start spawning. On turn 7, the two Berserker bosses start spawning. Now, the way that I usually like to approach this chapter is to basically just never fight them, to just keep moving forward and eventually kill and seize the boss without actually dealing with any of them. You can absolutely deal with some of them if you want, but you do want to make sure that characters are getting forward because they can get sort of swallowed up by the brigands and the Berserker bosses. So just be aware of that. The other two items are the Silver Blade, which the Silver Blade is not very good. Its hit rate is absolutely terrible. It's basically just some money. And then the Warp Staff. The Warp Staff is really difficult to get, and I probably wouldn't recommend. Oh, sorry, sorry about that. And I probably wouldn't recommend getting it. But it's extremely useful and can be really nice. But you really can just. There's one chapter I know later on that you can warp skip fairly nicely, but other than that, there's not a ton of use from the warp staff, so I wouldn't recommend getting that. So, as I said, the ones I really like are the Boots, the Talisman, the Speedwing, and the Silver Card, and if you can get the Silence, that can be very useful as well. Okay, so I've taken a lot of time doing this, so hopefully this episode doesn't wind up being too long. As I said, and we can look at the map again, the map is fairly straightforward, so it shouldn't be too bad. So let's start the chapter, and then we're going to be getting 2 new characters, and I'll talk about them. Okay, so just before we start, I do want to mention preps, because they are slightly important for this chapter. As I said, characters like Clarine and Alan will be really bad here because their movement will be severely limited. I am still bringing Lance because I think he's just too strong not to bring, even with his lack of movement. Obviously, characters like Melody, Tate, or Thani, if you're training her, can be extremely useful here. Now, we have talked about deployment order quite a bit. I am bringing Ellen, even though she's incapable of using Restore, mostly just as bait for Sleep and Silence. She does have a decent amount of resistance, so she can potentially avoid it. And her movement is good in the sand, so it doesn't really matter that much if she does get slept. I talked about Thieves. I would recommend bringing at least 1, but 2 could be extremely useful as well, just for vision. What you can do is just bring 1 and kind of get like the item here, and then the item up here. And like I said, you should get the boots because a lot of units are going to go around here. Or you can bring 2. This also potentially helps out with the Talisman. The Silent Staff, if you want to get that. But yeah, just be aware of that. One of the last things to be aware of here is, I believe the mage up here has Air Caliber, so that can be really difficult to deal with for your flyers, especially if your Melody's not promoted and you just throw her out there. So just be aware of that. My recommendation would be to just lead off with Lou, or if you have Lilina or whatever sage you have, because you won't have to deal with the wyverns for a little bit, and you can deal with those pretty well. But yeah, something like this I think is good. Just keep these things in mind. Obviously, your team might look different. But yeah. So let's start the chapter. I guess I can just do this right from here, because we are going to be getting 2 new units on this chapter. So we'll talk about them. Okay. So the first unit is Sophia. As you can see, she's not the strongest character in the world. Sophia is arguably the worst character in this game, barring maybe Wendy. Actually, Corella is probably the worst character in this game, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that Sophia is really bad. Um, she is, as you can see, a level 1 shaman, which is not particularly good. Her stats are pretty low. There's not much to talk about her, honestly. She's just a really low level. Flux, unfortunately, as well, has really bad hit in this game, and 2 skill is not helping that. The nice thing is that she can actually hit fairly hard. 14 will actually mean that her hit, her damage isn't too bad, so it's not that hard to find kills for her. But yeah, her growths are not particularly good. She won't be very good when she promotes to a druid, and her skill and low hit with dark magic means that you're just gonna have to watch that miss again and again and again. If you are really hard up for like healers or offensive magic, you can promote her. As I said, it's not that difficult to train her if you really try, because she can hit fairly hard, but I would highly recommend not doing it. The other character we're getting is the complete other end of the spectrum, and that is Cecilia, one of the better characters in the game. Now, as you can see, she's a level 1 promoted unit, and her stats don't look the most impressive in the world, but there's a lot of like from there's a lot to like from Cecilia. I don't know why that's so difficult for me. Basically because of her class. She's a Valkyrie, which means she's essentially what Clarion will promote into. She has 7 defense and 30 health, which actually makes her fairly bulky. Her staff rank isn't the best, but C is good enough to use Restore, and you just need to get to B to use Physics, so not that bad. Her movement is amazing. She has 8, obviously, being a Valkyrie. Also, her anima magic rank is pretty good. And even though her stats don't look the best, the ability to immediately use a weapon like Excalibur and just stronger magic means that she will offer some chip damage as you progress. But mostly it's just that ability to immediately get a really high movement healer with decent magic. She's a really good unit. If you're using all the best units in the game, you may not use her, but she doesn't require a guiding ring or anything, and she is pretty amazing. So yeah, those are the new characters for the game. As I said, for the chapter, our strategy for this chapter is going to be mostly dealing with these wyverns and getting treasure. So I'm going to be skipping around a little bit from here on out, and we'll talk about the chapter as we go. Okay, so just one more thing that I wanted to mention real quick. As we can see, we do have the Silence Priest. I don't think I can see the Sleep Priest. I think the Bishop has Sleep, like I said. But just be aware that those do exist. They also really like to put Sophia to sleep, which can be annoying, but honestly really isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things because, as I said, Sophia actually does have her full movement in the desert. So honestly, waking her up might not even be necessarily what you want to do. If you have a restore staff handy, here's our restore staff at the moment. You can wake her up a couple times. You can also pick her up and then wait for her to use her sleep turns when you get up here. But honestly, she'll probably use these sleep turns and be able to get out of here by the time the bandits are showing up. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but just know that they really do like to go after Sophia. I was also wrong about the Excalibur guy. The first mage just has Thunder. It's the other mage that has Excalibur. And just be aware as well that Melody is a really good way to bait out these wyverns that are up here. But yeah, as I said, I'm having Kath. She just got the Speedwing, so she's going to get the Talisman, and then I'll probably have a stall go up here and get the silver card. But yeah, just be aware that they do really like to sleep Sophia. Okay, so I've skipped ahead just a little bit here. As you can see, we are on turn 8, so the reinforcements from the south have spawned. It's a lot of... Well, that guy's got a killer axe. It's a lot of these brigands which aren't too scary. I'll probably show them later when they're in range. There are also 2 berserker bosses that spawn down here that are actually fairly scary. So fighting them can actually be kind of a hassle. And then as you can see, we are getting the silver card here. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, I've talked about how good mercenaries are in this game. They remain pretty strong. There's also multiple heroes. These heroes aren't too much like fast or anything, but they do have a lot more defense, so they're really bulky. They also have a lot of health. And this guy's got a killing edge, so be careful of that. There's also a lot of these annoying healers up here. I've dealt with most of them, but yeah, Mildy can do a great job here, especially if she's promoted. But yeah, just be aware of that. So if you remember when we actually looked at the thing, there's basically one more group of fighters and mercenaries. Once you get to about here, and I'll talk about that when we get there are some wyverns down here that are going to basically aggro to you, along with some mages, so just be aware of that. But for the most part, you just want to slowly clear out the heroes and the mercenaries that are up here currently. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end of the chapter at this point. I just wanted to show off We can currently see one of the berserkers. As I said, there are two of them. I believe the other one might have a killer axe. I'm not sure. But as you can see, they're quite strong, and the fact that berserkers are always going to have crit means it's going to be really hard for any of your units to actually survive a potential crit from a unit like this. So just be careful. They also have forward movement in the sand, which is more than a lot of your infantry. So just be aware of that. Another thing to note, I don't know, I'll probably mention this in like every chapter because most of the best strategies in this game come down to just using Mility as much as possible. But Mility's pretty much killed all of the mercenaries and stuff that are around here. As you can see, there is a mage, and then we're going to be seeing a few other units that are going to aggro up to me in a second here. The other thing that I wanted to mention are these tiles. You can probably figure this out, but these tiles are not affected by the movement penalty. So once you get to over here, you could really start breezing through this chapter with a lot of your units. It's not as slow going as the beginning parts. So, oh yeah, and I guess I'll just show, as you can see, Milody's fighting them. But yeah, there is a wyvern that just came out here. I believe they aggro whether you're in their range or not. And she gets a ridiculous level up because Milody's Milody. But yeah, just be aware of these guys. This guy's actually quite tough. Actually, this is a really good example of how strong these wyverns are, and will be going forward. Their hit rate is not the best, especially on Lance, who has capped speed, but they will one-shot most of your weaker units and will be really dangerous against even your stronger units. As you can see, our Lance absolutely could have died here, although he dodged both. So yeah, wyverns are going to become more and more a part of the game as we progress, and just be aware, because especially wyvern lords are really tough. Okay, so like I said, you are also going to want to pick up the guiding ring with Sophia. I don't think you have to pick up this guiding ring for the guiding chapter. Sophia does have to be alive, but I don't think you have to pick up the guiding ring, but you may as well. The last thing to talk about here is the boss, Randy. Kind of a kind of a funny name, I guess, but he is not particularly difficult. You know, as I said, heroes are really good in this game, but he's not really that much stronger than like a normal hero that we've been fighting on this chapter. Obviously, this, like most bosses, is going to depend on your units. He does have a light brand and very weak resistance, so one of the best strategies here is Lou or the Lina can do great because they essentially take no damage from the light brand. It can deal really good damage. Rucker is also amazing, as always. He is the ultimate boss killer, and then you have our Milady. Milady isn't always promoted at this point, but if she is, she can do really well. So there are a lot of different utilities for killing this boss, so I wouldn't worry about him too much. In fact, I can't quite make our Rucker move again. You can see how Lance would do. Yeah, totally fine. The crit is a little bit worrisome, but you can avoid that with other characters, so yeah. Don't worry too much about this boss. There are a few sort of tricks, as I said, with the resistance and the mage. One of the things I will say going forward is that bosses with light brands can be abused pretty easily by just magic users, because they'll essentially never be able to deal any damage at range. There's one other boss in the game, a swordmaster named Gel, who's pretty easily cheesed by that, but yeah, as I said, this boss, not too difficult. Alright, so we're basically at the end of the chapter at this point. I am going to just be finishing the boss with Lou here. As you can see, his hit is pretty consistent, and our Lou is actually a little bit slow, I think, at level 7. So if your Lou's even faster, he can actually deal a lot of damage. But whether you can double or not, you deal a decent amount. So we'll have Lou finish off the boss. Now, I'll look in a minute, but I believe it's only like turn, I think it's less than 15 at this point. And as I said, you do have 25 turns to complete this chapter, so with a little bit of leeway left, there is the potential that you could go get the warp staff. I don't know why this Lou has so much skill. That is way more skill than he needs. Turn 16, and I've actually been kind of diddling around here a little bit, so you can absolutely do that, but I would probably recommend just finishing the chapter and not worrying too much about getting the warp staff. But yep, that is chapter 14, Arcadia, a chapter that can look a little daunting, but honestly is fairly empty. As long as you're just being careful with the enemy spawns and stuff, it's not too bad. So yep, as always, I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see you next time.